Hello. How are you doing?
Good,
Better. I'm feeling miserable. Last few days. I'm 95% now.
Oh,
So
nice.
we're good. Yeah, we're good. Okay, so we're gonna do a VPN lab. Well, at least configure VPN so you know how. And then we're also gonna set firewall rules with it, along with create user and groups for it. Hey, Alma, should we grab our drives for today? I'm gonna give Cisco a little break. We'll come back. So my schedule is approved. So 40C is gonna be in the evening though, because I'm doing it, and then the 40D, 41A, 41B, if they approve that, those are gonna be online. And then of course I'm teaching 27A or 27, which is a security class online. Or actually, no, that's physical class. I'll show you the schedule. There have been some changes. So hopefully most of you will be able to finish the certificate or at least proceed, right? And then 30C is the Python cybersecurity one that's gonna be available online via Zoom. Okay, so check out Lab 11. And then we'll get started. We're gonna need our drive and our virtual box. So before you boot your virtual machine today, make sure that you select it and then go to settings. Okay, we are going to bridge it, because as you bridge the adapter, it's going to be able to see the driver for your network interface card, which is needed when you do RRAS. You do have multiple network controller on here. Now on VirtualBox, if you wanted to configure additional adapter to simulate server for future references, you would also use the network settings, and then you need to select the type of adapter that you want. Okay, so when we use a bridge adapter, all that is going to use your host system, your physical computer interface, network interface cards, wireless, etc. for it. Okay, so make sure we set that up and then click OK, and we are going to start. So while you're booting your, let me close this. While you're booting your virtual machine, I just want to run through this. And Microsoft does a really good job lately to really document these type of instructions and information. So you can learn a lot, basically just going through the documentation itself. So DirectAccess is something that was implemented in 2009. It was not something that was in the older OSs for the server. It really aimed to implement VPN with simplicity. In the case of management and also for the user to connect to your virtual private network. So a lot of companies are having remote worker, and especially now, right? So Microsoft thought that it would be a lot easier. So before it was a little bit clunky. Now I think it's much better. So in the area, so the time that it really started was in Windows 8. When they released Windows 8, which is long ago, of course, but as you can see, since then it's been really successful in the management side. So it's really aimed to make it easy for the client to connect to your virtual private network. It's also gonna make it easier for administrator to manage, especially when we have connection. Now, you do have companies that are 100% remote of late, right? But originally we only limit those numbers of people that's going to remotely connect. So here is the inventory list that you have to go through before you do your VPN is very ideal for a lot of the enterprises, but you have to make sure that you are up to par with a lot of the server roles and the services that you're running. So this is what Microsoft require or recommend. Some of them are requirements, some of them are recommendation. You have to configure firewall rules for virtual private network. It's a must. Otherwise, you're not going to get connection. Second, you are going to have a direct access server, and that's what we're going to set up today. And this is going to be a network location server. So you can run it on top of all the other server roles, just like what we've been doing, or you can keep it separately. Keep in mind that it is bringing in traffic remotely, so you do have some risk that's involved in that. So normally we would separate that role. So if you're using virtualization, you can actually virtualize another machine, and you can also have subsidiary machines underneath your domain our structure, right? You want all your wireless systems, especially all the IoT devices, in a domain where you can install the direct access server. So let's say that you have a branch that's going to mostly use wireless devices. Hi, grab your drive. You want to really focus on that side of the house. So what they're recommending is that you should keep all your wireless systems, like your laptops, your mobile devices, even when they come into your facility or they're working remotely connecting in, to be separate. Because wireless just have more prone risk, that's why, right? So all your mobile computers should be on enable on the domain, and you need to deploy that. VPN should be enabled, but you need to also run a DHCP, so we cannot use static IP in this type of environment to be able to really create more of a dynamic network, so it's much easier to manage. We are going to learn how to do a static address pool today, but normally you would need DHCP. Okay, so keep in mind that direct access is always going to tie to web server, right? And other things, because most companies, they're not going to make you connect directly to a server. It's actually through a firewall and then through their web server. So because it's easier for people just to put in a URL, right? Like how you use your VPN services at home. It's actually connecting to a web server and then a DNS and then eventually the direct access role, right? And then the RRAS. So there's like layers of different servers that it has to go through before. Now, some company, they'll just have you connect to an IP address. Other company, they will be more thorough using a full qualified domain name, like a URL, right? Like, company.com, etc. Okay, so this is why this area is implemented. So you have to have a domain controller. That means you have to have a DNS and you have to have Active Directory. So whenever you see domain controller, those two always go together. You also need to have System Center Configuration Server and the Health Registration Authority. This is usually used for like automation, well, for self-registration, like you know how you fill out forms online to register for an account. It really aims for that. Okay, so you can set up an HRA servers and implement that with the web services. But for a lot of the compliance reason, and I do audit occasionally, so I feel like most companies are really up to par on this, that whenever your mobile system is connecting to your network, the first thing it should do is it should check if that system actually have an antivirus program and if it's up to date. And this is when you can apply some of the policy and the requirement for all the system connected. Even here, when you connect to the wireless here, like whenever I connect to RCCD, right, it checks for my antivirus and if it's up to date, because they're bringing in more risks, right? That's just to protect your resources. And then you can also implement network access protection, your NAP client compliance. So on the back end, we are gonna, these areas are really focuses on the compliance overall. So when we say compliance, what does that mean? Every institution, every organization has to fulfill a regulation requirement. If you're a school, you have to fulfill FERPA, and then if you're school district, you have to fulfill other areas like, you know, with minors, information needs to be protected. And then if you're healthcare, you're HIPAA compliant. And then if you accept credit cards and if you're running that services on your own, you have to comply with PCI DSS and so on. So that's for your master's degree. And yeah, so they, you know, in the security, upper security classes in the bachelor program, they talk about that. But you know, the management side does come later on with the master degree. They really focus on how you really build that, and there's framework for you to use, so you don't have to start from scratch. But anyway, so those are the roles that's recommended. So it says that if remote access requires a client NAP compliance, your NPS and your HRS server should be deployed. So what it's saying is that all of these roles need to be installed and activated, right? Enabled, configured, for you to really roll your VPN and your RRAS, okay? If you need to meet compliance requirement, okay? We're gonna see some of this in a little bit. You can have a direct access server that's a domain member, so it has to be a domain member, or it could be part of your domain controller, which is what we're using. And then it can be deployed at the edge or the internal edge of the internal network. That means that it's on the outside, right? So when you're looking at the topology, that should be, when we're saying it's at the edge, that is web front. That's going to be at the DMZ area. Okay. Now, what if what if you have it internally? Then you just got to make sure that you protect it with firewall rules and your security policies, and everything needs to be in place. Because remember, there's traffic coming in and somebody can impersonate your user and come in and create problems, right? So there is a risk, and we have to see that. So it needs, your server is located behind the edge firewall. So every time that traffic comes in from the internet, the cloud, right, you would see that there would be an edge firewall before it hits the router. Okay. Sometimes that could be on one appliance, but you would have a firewall placed on the outside. Sometimes they would do it right there, a router, and then a firewall on the inside. So those are the edge firewall, and you have to implement the rules so that way you can set up a specific port for that. Okay. Now, we will play with the security appliance Fortinet like in the next couple of weeks, so you can see how that's done. And then for your NAT device, whether, that will be those type of appliances, either your router or your edge firewall, okay? So you need to allow traffic, otherwise nothing comes in. All right. So additional information about group policy, we are going to set up user groups today. We're not doing group policy. I want to save that for 40C a little bit, so you can dive a little bit deeper on the group permissions in certain areas, because that's really the administration for the Active Directory piece. And then setting up some filter. It talks about security groups. I'm going to touch on that when we create that. So make sure that we apply the group scope, and I'll talk about the group scope for your clients. So everybody needs to be individual user account. Nobody share account. That's against compliance, right? I've audited warehouses that they have like a group of workers that share account. And processing transactions and stuff sometimes can be tricky to track, and fraudulent can occur when you don't have individual accounts. So it's just takes a little bit more work, but you can manage everybody individually. You can track the logs. Okay, so we're on. And then let's do this. And then we'll just do input, keyboard, Control Alt Delete, and then we're gonna log in. But make sure we bridge. Okay, so on Server Manager here, what I had set up was for you to make sure that you change your network settings. And then log in, and then we are going to do PowerShell real quick because I want to show you how you can do that. So if you don't see the icon on the taskbar, you just search for it. So everything that you can do on GUI, you can do in PowerShell. Also command line, right? So the way that we install features, remember how you go through the wizard, you click next and set up? PowerShell is like one line. It's beautiful. It's so easy. So you're going to do install dash window feature, one word, remote access. We already did this before, so it's just going to show you that it's already been successfully achieved. Okay. So we are going to do install dash, and then your Windows feature, one word, remote access, one word, as it's shown. Oh, no, Windows feature, I want to make sure, yep, remote access. Sorry, I'm getting install Windows feature. Oh, I have a typo. See that? I was like, I tested this 3 times. Like, I am not crazy. Like, I literally tested this lab 3 times. So, all right. So it should show that, right? And then on the next one, you would just, so when you install these features, right, it doesn't mean that you configure them. Just like how we went through the wizard and we select those checkboxes, right? That's exactly what we're doing. And then here we are going to do DirectAccess dash VPN. And if you want management tools, you just say dash include. So those are the options that you would use. Let's see if I can copy it. Okay, no. What is it? The VPN. And then we're gonna do a space dash include management tools. So that should say true, no restart, it's already there, right? And then lastly, we are going to do install feature routing. And I know we talked about this last, like a few labs ago, and we need to have 2 network interface card, but remote access is always going to tie with routing. So that's why it's called RRAS, right? So you're going to have to install it together. This one is also management tools. Okay. So we have this going. Then if you wanted just to close, just to exit. All right. So just like what it says earlier, we have to have group and users. Okay, that's first, right? You can go through the next process, but then you're gonna find out that, oh, you have to switch back to Active Directory. So a lot of tutorials, they have you go through the other part and then come back here. But I wanted to write it like the way that it should be done. Okay, so we are gonna go ahead and use Active Directory and users and computer. we did this a while back. So if you don't have Active Directory, you have to, install AD. Under tools. So once you remember that how we promote it in the domain to become a domain controller, it's on top of the forest. It has all of these other management capability. So one of the capability is going to be the users and computers. That's where you're going to make your users. So once the system becomes the domain controller, that's where you manage your user. Okay. Then you're going to click on your server, and then here's your users. So you can right click here and then choose new, or you can open it up and then go here and then right click and then choose new. That's really the same thing. Okay. So if you right click it, you can do new, and then you can choose a group. Everything needs to be group managed. Okay. Do not use just, and very rarely that you need to do user manage, only the user. You need to throw them into the group and then manage the group. Okay. So we're going to make a new group. And at this point, I am here. Okay. And you would give it a name that will be relevant to the group of people. Okay. So let's think about it, like FedEx and UPS. I think about that all the time when I see them. They're using those hand scanner. Those are all mobile connected, right? So when they scan a package that's delivered at your door, it updates their database. So that system needs to be connected and that transaction needs to be submitted, you see? So all of that needs to be happening. So you can, so that will be like the deliver group, right? All right, so we're gonna call this the mobile workers. So original. All right, so I wanted to give you a little understanding on what these means. So these are the scope, okay? And I put the scope here for you to kind of see. This is a little bit summarized, but so the universal group, it can contain groups from global and universal, and any domain in the forest. So in the forest, you might have different domains like caseywind.com, jarrell.com, cynthiaroman.com, etc. Right? Under that, we talked about sister company already. Okay. So you might have like different groups from different subdomains and then put them into that forest. It doesn't really care about trust. And when we're using VPN, we want that trust. And that trust is going to establish a certificate and keys and access for us. So no universal for VPN users. Okay. Global group. It contains users, systems, because sometimes it's just systems like those terminals that you buy tickets for train, planes, and so on, right? There's no user there. There's like just a system and people just interface with it, right? So those, the computers, but the groups from the same domain, but not in the universal group. So global groups cannot be in universal group. And even though universal group can take global group, I think it's, okay, never mind. Okay, so it can be a member of the global groups in the same domain local groups. So up at the local system level, that will be your domain local group. So I'm talking about that server itself, like when you create the local user account, that's the domain local groups. That's what they're talking about. And then the universal groups of any domain in the forest or the trusted domain. I normally use global groups for anything that's trusted. Okay. The domain local group, that's only to the system. It can contain users, computers, local, global groups, universal groups, or any domain in the forest, and any trusted domain and domain local groups from the same domain. It can be a member of any domain for the local group. So the way this works is like this. Think about like just the logical side, just by the name, right? The local system, the global, the universe. Okay. So the way that you scale out is that the universe is more broad and it doesn't care who's who, really, like, well, who trusts who. But if you wanted really that trust relationship, so when I say a trusted relationship, meaning that a certain domain is trusted with another certain domain, Like my domain trusts yours and we establish that trust. And that's done through domain controller to domain controller, okay? And with that, like it will be able to sync, to communicate, to transfer data, to update users and groups and so on, okay? Now, at the lower level, that will be your domain local, that's to that system. So when you go to like computer management console and you right click and you create the group and the user, that's the local group, right? So that's on the lower level. So if you scale that out, right? So we're saying that the VPN people are going to be in the global group. Why? We wanted that trust because we wanted to have you're going to see the pre-shared key, and that trust needs to be established for the connection. And also in the case where they're in another domain, right? That if they're in a global group in another domain, they can be associated. Okay. What if they work in both companies, right? Like a manager that goes back and forth. So, okay. So after you create the group, you're going to make the users, okay, like 3 or 4 users I had put down. So we're going to choose the global and the security. We're going to click OK. And then here you can just right click and then you just go new. You've seen this before, right? User. And we just do a user account, Alex Smith. And most company would just use their initial, like first initial, last name. And then if there's another A Smith, they'll just do A Smith 1. That's what RCCD does. Most companies does that. Some company, I used to work for one that uses only employee ID. So if you don't know employee ID, you can't really log in, right? Okay. Yep.
So I remember when I was at when I did the internship for East 11, they gave me access to their VPN. But I was only able to have access to it for a year.
Yeah.
So you can like.
Yeah, you can
manage
put the
people.
expiration on it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can put expiration on the account.
How do you do that? Is it kind of the same way as when we do
Yeah,
that?
so in the
Oh.
group membership, I'll show you.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, so that's okay. And then you have to give them a generic password.
Yeah, they gave me.
Yeah.
generic password.
And then
Well,
you
they
just
I'm sorry.
you just reset it, right?
Right. Yeah. Mhm. And so they did that because apparently, like, we couldn't use the Simon's NX
Yep.
without using the. Well, so we had to, in order to access the software, we had to use the.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how they control their software licenses, because otherwise, you know, people would just go there publicly and start downloading
Yeah,
software.
use
Right?
it for free.
Yeah. Oh, I got lazy and I didn't put in the, yeah, so you have to use complex password. I hope that matches. And then after you create the user, you can okay, then we'll add them to the group. Okay, so we're gonna right click the user and then you're gonna go property. And then you're gonna go member of, right? You can do it 2 ways. You can do it from the user or the group. And then you just do add. And here is where you put mobile workers. Okay, and you can check names if you want to be sure. If it can't find the actual group, it'll tell you, right? So if you have a typo or something, then it will not highlight it. Okay, so what I did was I right click the user. Okay, and then I just go You can add it to the group like this, and then you just type in the group name, or you can right click and then go to properties, and then you can go member of, and that will show the membership property. So they are a domain user and they're also part of the other group. Now, sometimes you're gonna run into conflict with permissions and privileges in that one group trump the other, right? So if you are restricting one group more than the other, you know, by rule, it should go with the least privilege. Okay, so you always want to check what kind of group that you're nesting, and then sometimes you throw a group inside another group, right? And then so it's just gonna go with the least privilege. Okay, so if you look at the property of the user, you would find more information about that particular user account. So Cynthia asked earlier, like, how can I make a user go away in a year, right? You would go to that account or the group, okay? If let's say I wanted to manage it by the user, like, you know, I'm only contracting with this worker for 1 year, and then go to properties, and in the account settings, you would see you can control their login hours, you can control where they're logging into, you can control end of, right? Account expires, so the expiration happens here, and then you put in the date. Okay, so it will lock out their account. It won't go away, it will just not allow them to access it after that point. Okay, and then if they're still there, right, we extended the contract, and you go back and you change it. Okay, you know, we always trying to disable. Now, the time that they log in, you know, if you have like lockout policy, right, like 5 password fail locks them out for like an hour, and then you get a phone call, right? I'm locked out of my account, I can't process this for this customer. Then you go and you uncheck the unlock the account, and then it'll just unlock it for them, or you just reset their password for them. Okay, we have an automated process for that now, right? Automatically send you an email, and then they just click on it. So remember how we talked about the help process? That's part of the self-registration, is to create your own password and all of that. It's just automated. Okay, so once you add the account in, Alex is now, and then you can go into the group and you can check to see who the members would be. So for my mobile workers, right, if you click on members, when you add more members, they show up here. Just practice creating user account. And then if you're clever, right, you can write a script and then just make a bunch of accounts. Yeah, so what you do is you have it read an Excel spreadsheet or XML file, right? And then on there you have first name, last name, login, default password, and then so it's gonna open up the file. You know how to do that in Python, right? Read each single line and then plug it in, and then you can run that script in PowerShell, and there you go. And then you just go have your coffee and not worry about it. Versus sitting there and creating thousands and thousands of accounts, but if they pay you by the hour, that's great. All right, so after we do that, just take a screenshot for me for your users and groups that it's there. It should show up under the users folder. Then we are going to do the direct access now. Okay. So we can close this. So here it tells you to go to tools and then remote access management tools. Okay, click on remote access management. So this looks a little bit different than what you've seen before when we did the RRAS, right? So this allows us to really manage our server on who's accessing it remotely. So here I am, I'm at this step number 17. On the left pane, you're just gonna click direct access and VPN. This part, okay? And they put this here for you, so it's easy for you to use. Okay, then we're gonna click on the remote access setup wizard. And it's gonna prompt you this. So we have options in doing direct access with VPN, which most people do, right? So you would click this one, the first choice. And then, Microsoft they make it like super easy. So step one, we're gonna configure this part right here. Okay. So at this point, where am I at right here? I already selected this and then I click configure for step one. And then I'm going to keep the first option. I'm going to proceed to next. And the first option is deploy the full direct access for the client and remote management. That's what I want. So go next. Now, if you don't have a group and users, this is where you have to go back to Active Directory and make them. And then here's where we're going to add our group. Click add. And then you're going to do mobile workers. And if you want to check it, you can check the name, make sure, and then click OK. And you can add as many as you need to, right? Okay. Then we want to also check the enable direct access checkbox for the mobile computers only, and then click next. So we want to check this right here. Don't forget. And we have a specified security group. Go next. So now, if you don't have a bridge adapter, this is where you can't add things. So we want to make sure that it sees your network interface adapter. So double click on the resource field, and then you're going to put in the server name. So how do I know my server name? Really easy. If you pull this aside right here, your server name is right there, right? Ideally, in the real world environment, we would name our server before we promote it to the domain controller. And I didn't include that step when I did it with you guys, but yeah, so you would name it like an actual name schematically. So when you click on this right here, double click. So remember what I said earlier, you can actually have a web server that connects everybody to these things, right? So we want to go ahead and check. We're going to use ping to validate the connections every time they try to connect. And then you just type in your server name. RL59 HPVUGN. And then your .com. And if it exists, it will give you a green check. So what it's doing is we're giving it a path, right? Which system on which domain. And you can find your server name right there. That's part of your remote access management console. It lists that right there. And you click add. And then here we would put in help desk email. So normally it's help desk, right, at your domain. Whatever your domain controller, your FQDN is. And then we have to actually set that up in Exchange, right? Okay. So, and then the default is workplace connection, and you can actually set it for like a certain part of your enterprise. Okay, so it's gonna, after we validate, we put in our help desk. So in the case where if they can't connect, right, they will be prompted with this email address so they can send them an email. And this is part of NCA. So NCA is used to look at their connection status. So if it's failing, right, it's gonna give them some troubleshooting information, and then it's gonna include the help desk information. Okay, then we're gonna click finish, and that is part of step one. Okay, now on the remote access, instead of going this way right here, which you can, you are going to open up RRAS on the right. Okay, and notice that this server is disabled, right? It's red. So we need to configure it. It's not ready. Okay, we're going to right click it, and then we're going to select configure enable remote routing, and then click next. And then you get this wizard. You're going to go next. We're going to choose custom configuration. Okay. So after custom, we're going to go next, and then we're going to select VPN access and NAT checkboxes. And we already talked about NAT before, right? And then after you selected those, you're going to go next, and then it's going to give you the summary, and you're going to finish. It takes a minute. And then it's going to ask you to start the service. Click that. Now, if you really want to test this, okay, you can with another virtual machine. You just gotta, some people, I read a thread that some people use their Android to test it and it worked. Okay, a little tricky, but but we are only like a portion done, right? You haven't done some of the stuff, but anyway, we don't have a public IP. If you do have a public IP, use that, and then they just connect through it with public IP, and that's gonna take care of that. Bring it into your VPN. Okay, it works. All right. Okay, then after that, coming back here. Here it is. Okay. Okay. Okay, so under routing on the left pane, right click your local server, click property. This shows you the configuration for the server. And then, let's see. Then you're gonna go to the security tab. Oops. So we're gonna have to set it for L2TP. L2TP. Allow custom. Check that. Now that's gonna generate the pre-share key. Then we're gonna do IPv4. And we're gonna do a pull. So put in the range for the systems that's gonna be connecting. Now, if you don't, you can use dynamic DHCP, which normally is used. So the address should be in the range of your network, okay? So I put right here. So how do you check your IP? You go to your toolbox, you click on your local server, your IP address is there. So mine is 172.16.0.140. I'll go ahead and use with the net range. Up into my property box. Okay, there it is. So 172.16.0. So let's say I'm going to do 150 to 160. Now, if you have a larger pool, just for more systems, okay, click OK, then click Add, and there it is. Okay. All right. Then you're gonna configure your NAT next. Okay. So in the same thing, you're gonna expand your local server, expand to IPv4. You see a NAT object. Then you're gonna right click it, and then you're gonna click View Interface. So you choose custom policy. Yeah, so it says if you choose to allow custom IP policy, pre-share key is required. Enter the pre-share key and then save. Let me see. Did I found something there for it? We can just give it a name for now. We just have to create that. It should create that earlier. Click OK. No, click Fine. Okay, just put in a name for it and then we'll come back and fix that. Okay, on the IPv4, expand that and then click NAT, right click it, and then you're gonna do a new interface. So it shows your adapters, okay? Then, yeah, so change the private address from 000 to 127.0.1 and then click OK. Yeah, so you can click the adapter and then you're gonna do private. Did it say private? Yeah. Hold on, I think I skipped something. Okay. All right. I think I left that out. So when you after you create the new interface, right? Go to properties for NAT and then address assignment. Wait, hold on one second. Public interface. Yeah, we're not doing the public. Errors only, translation, address assignment. Uh-huh.
How did you get to the net, or how did you get to where the net appeared on the IP?
Yeah, so here you just click expand. Oh, it doesn't have it on yours? Did you select it earlier?
Yeah.
When you did the VPN part?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you selected it in this part right here, step 34, it should be there. So if you go back to your routing and click your server, and then click IPv4, and that should be there.
So go to,
It's not there? Yeah, so on your routing and services, right, open this.
okay,
It takes you here, right? You expand this, and then you expand IPv4, and then you expand that. And then you create a new interface. Is it internal? Hold on 1 second. Yeah. Just disregard the, you don't need to do 127. Just let me highlight this. I don't know what I put there. Okay.
it's not really.
So you should check redo 34.
Alright,
Yeah, see, it makes sure that VPN and that is there. You might have just selected VPN only.
oh, okay.
Anybody else have that same problem? Okay. So after that, we just click OK, and then this will restart the services. So it started that. Now we're going to configure the firewall. Okay. So you can close this. I'll check it in a second. Okay, let me walk them through because we're almost done. Okay. So you can search for Windows Firewall. I've seen this before.
Oh, okay, there it is.
You saw it?
Yeah, it's, I don't agree.
Okay, so in here, after you search fire and you will find firewall and network protection, just click advanced settings. And then it's gonna take you, it might pop up behind it. So here's your Windows firewall. Then you are gonna add the rule. Okay. So on the right hand side, you are gonna be able to see the inbound rule. You gotta click inbound rule on the left and then click the new rule on the right. So inbound rule here, new rule on the right, and then you just do the setting for it. Okay. So it has a predefined rule, but you need to enable it for the VPN. So in the wizard, you're going to click the predefined radio button and then select routing and remote access from the drop down. Okay, so select this. And then here is where you're going to find routing and remote access. This. And then on the action, you just need to click allowed. So we were using L2TP, right? It is an update from point to point. So that's what you're gonna do. Select that and go next. Allow connection. Now you can choose allow if the connection is secure, then you can customize that requirement, right? If you just allow the connection because you specify that those are the IP addresses that you want, then it will just, this is gonna be tunneling with IPsec. Okay. Finish. And it should be there now. Okay. That is it. So now we're good to go, right? The only way that we can test it is, right, if you want to use a virtual machine, you can run like another Windows virtual machine, bridge it on from your host, right? Give it an IP address in that range, and then let it connect. We can connect, but first join it to the domain and then connect. That might be another lab in another class. So take a picture of your firewall rule that you have added. It shows that there's mine right here. It's enabled, it's allowed. And then screenshot that. Any question? Uh-huh.
That part,
Yeah.
mine didn't restart. It's supposed to be.
No, it did. Yeah.
No?
Only
Okay.
if you change the IP. We don't need to change the IP on that.
Okay.
I don't know why I put that. Must have been delirious or something. But yeah, so when you have the interface, so now what you see is that it's not mapping any kind, there's no inbound packets yet, but when people start connecting to it, you will be able to see it. That's how you monitor it through NAT. Because NAT is going to be the middle role that's going to take all the public stuff, convert it to private, and then take all the private stuff, convert to public, right? So that's how it's able to negotiate what's coming in that will be remotely to your own internal network. So if I'm connecting with my computer, I'm using a public IP, right, from somewhere else. But once I authenticate and I hit the network, it's gonna, that traffic is gonna become that IP address inside the network, you know, the 172.16. Whatever. Yeah, so it's gonna take on the IP. Yeah. And ultimately, most of the time you remote into a system that already exists, right? Like a PC at your desk. So those are gonna be the system that has the IP address in that thing.
Basically, what it's doing is that so every system has its own IP. And then when you use that, it'll change it to that 172.
Yeah, so it takes the traffic from the inside when it sends it outside, uses the public IP, right? It's kind of like you can have many of the nicknames at home, but everybody knows you as a legal name. So NAT does that for you, right? And then when you enter the network, like when you enter the home, you know, it converts your formal name to your nickname, right? So that's how it's able to really treat what's in the network and what's outside the network. So it helps us be able to do that. And that's often what you would see with the routing role is the router does a lot of that because it's bringing in traffic, and you can set that up with the router. That's NAT. Okay. But with the remote access server, you can do that as well.
That allows you to basically see who's really going into your system.
Yeah, well, you want the client, your workers to really access your network so they can do the job, right? Because they might not have the application on their computer. They're just using the internet connection to get access to their computer at your facility, right? And if for 100% remote working type of enterprise, they don't really have a desk. All it is a profile, right, with all the applications and everything that you need to be able to, you know, do sales online or whatever.
That's kind of what my brother goes through. Then.
Yeah.
He's a remote worker.
Yeah.
Like permanent now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he still have to connect to, you know, the company resources,
Yeah.
either the computer or, you know, the applications or whatever it is. And some company, they would actually use like a virtual server, right? Like vSphere, to be able to have like these virtual systems. So you can work on your computer. Like let's say I'm a designer and I remotely log in. I can do part of my design, save it to my virtual systems, right? And it would save that file, and then tomorrow I'll just log back in and pull that file again, and it will just save the status of my design, right? Instead of starting all over again, it defeats the purpose of my work.
Right.
Instead of saving it on my computer. So that's how they can control proprietary stuff that way. Instead of like, you know, saving it on your computer and downloading it, you have to log in and use their resources so they can manage your work, and that's part of their operation, right? Because what if it's like, you know, like a layout to a plane or a jet fighter or stuff like that, that's very proprietary to our government, right? You can't just download it and put it on your computer. you have to use their resources and keep it there. And then they can also check to see if, if you work on certain things, and you can share that with other engineers and so on. So that's how you can control like information and data being retained inside your network. Yep. Other questions? Yeah.
So is this different than, because I know sometimes like at work, they'll do like a remote, I mean, a VPN connection, and then from there they'll do like a remote desktop to your actual desktop.
Yeah. So that's if you connect to an actual PC, but you can still simulate that with virtual environment, right? Like a virtual machine on a virtual server or a cloud server, and all that is they are instances, we call them, as virtual machines. So I can have a bunch of Windows 10 virtual machine for different user.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
you don't have to have an actual.
Oh yeah, you don't. You can do 100% remote through cloud.
Okay.
Yeah. There are great software for that. Like VMware does a really good job with that, where they have a virtual server role, right? And then you can manage all of that. And then if you use like cloud product like AWS and so on, or Azure, Microsoft, you can do the instances on that way too. Or what you can also do is you can also create like individual profile, make it roaming profile in a Windows 10. But a lot of times they would treat it like a desktop, right? Like a real physical system. And we can do it that way. We can have an actual desk being connected to, somebody that's working it from home.
Yeah.
Or we can do it from an instance from a virtual environment, which saves companies so much money. So when a company decided that since COVID hit, we're not going to come back, right? So they're going to pull out all the computers at all their facilities, and then they'll just sell it or donate it. And then they'll put everything on the cloud, and then they manage it that way. It's a lot easier to manage. I think that's a huge saving for them, because you're not only managing like your hardware and the maintenance behind that, all your administrators can just manage remotely, on the cloud. And you can terminal it into your Cisco switches and all of that, like Cisco and all the network appliances. You can set it up where you can connect to the console port via the web.
Okay.
Yeah, with SSH. Yeah, so you just create that key, and then you just authenticate to it. So just like how you remote into a computer, it will terminal into that system, right? And then you'll be able to configure it real quick, and then set up whatever you need to set up or change things, and then that's it. So everything that I think IT streamlined everything, right? Like we are the type of people that if we can make it faster, we would, right? If we can automate things, we would. And that's how like the innovation behind IT is always changing, is because we're always looking for things to do faster, better, quicker. Because why would you go to every single system to configure things if you can do it all in one shot, right? That's save time, and then you just go watch cat videos. Just kidding. Yeah, so this kind of gives you an overview. So just keep in mind that we still have to do like certificates and domain trust, which I'm probably not I'm gonna touch on in 40C. That's really the class for it. So you can promote and then demote a server, a DNS and so on. Like when you retire it, or when you buy out a company, just move their stuff and then get rid of it. And when you start to become and this stuff gets Microsoft, we emphasize a lot of it because there's so many elements in it, right? Compared to other type of OS like Linux, where it's simple. You still have a directory service, just not as complicated. But it is fun. Okay, if we're done, submit and have a wonderful weekend. Next week, no Thursday, holiday, Veterans Day. Enjoy yourself, right? And if you want to catch up for something, let me know. I'll come on campus on Tuesday. Otherwise, I will work remotely from home on, because I teach on Tuesday night on Zoom. But okay, and I will get your notes up. We're gonna do a couple of chapters combined for security, which is easy. All right. And then practice Network Plus.